this point in time, I'd like to go ahead and transition to the next speaker, and it kind of, again, continues down this path, and I guess we're going to talk about FOQA next, and with that's really going to be kind of the segue from where Kim started, where Derek had spoken, and now with Ferenc coming up next. Ferenc, I'm going to try. I'm going to butcher it, but I'm going to try. Czatlos? All right, I'm going with Csatlos. He grew up in Hungary in Eastern Europe. He always dreamed about flying airplanes, however, did not have the infrastructure or the means to be around airplanes. In 1997, after graduating from high school, he moved to the United States to study and play competitive hockey. Wow. In early 2000s, he took a discovery flight at a local airport. The second he lifted off into the 3D world, he was hooked. After earning his private pilot instrument and commercial certificate, he purchased his first family airplane, Piper Cherokee 6. A few years later, he transitions to his current aircraft, a Piper Malibu. Combining his passion for teaching and knowledge transfer and flying, he earned his flight instructor ratings. He's flown over 2,300 hours, over which 1,000 is in the PA-46 airplanes. His goal is to pass along the knowledge and experiences he's gained over the years and that make you a better and confident and safer pilot. His family resides in Des Moines, Iowa, and is a convenient location for Midwest clients. In his free time, he enjoys spending time with his family, playing hockey, mountain biking, and skiing. I bet you're not doing a lot of skiing in Des Moines, Iowa, though. Anyway, I'd like to introduce Ferenc.
Thank you, Ryan.
Yeah, thank you.
So Ryan, for skiing, we opted for Colorado. So we oftentimes come out to Centennial and then hit the mountains.
Car and went racing around town.
Or behind the Malibu and do some slow flight
there you
on
go.
the highway. Good morning. Yeah, still morning, everyone. So let's do this. Let's everybody get up for like 10 seconds and just stand, right? I know it sounds silly. So believe it or not, and you can stretch a little bit. So right now, you just improved your calorie burns by 30%. Right now, everybody's burning 30% more calories. So the point is that we can make small improvements can have a significant result. So you can go ahead and sit down. The topic we're going to talk about is continue the FOQA. So Kim, thank you. I didn't know. I kept pronouncing like FOQA. This morning we were jogging and Joe asked me, it's like, what is that FO? And I'm like, I couldn't even pronounce it. So FOQA, it sounds pretty good. Make acronyms even more interesting, we're going to put the P in front of it. So then you can guess what that P stands for, and then you'll see it in the presentation. So data is really, really interesting. And this, yesterday and today we had a lot of good dialogue around how do we gather the data. And I'm a true believer that if we have the right attitude as a community and if we put in the effort, we can accomplish anything. So hopefully, in this presentation, you're going to see it in action and what we can do today while MOPA and the safety committee is working on the longer-term solution. I love Peter Drucker's quote, right? If you can measure it, you can improve it. So let's start figuring out how we can measure it so we can improve. This is the background. So not a whole lot. I love the Malibu. It's an 87, so I'm a little bit passionate and biased about the Continental Malibu, but there's the family behind it. The intro. So what's the definition? I'm not going to spend a lot of energy on it. You can read it, but the one word here is the proactive and predictive, right? So it's always good that we look back and say, well, what happened, and we'll do it. But what about, let's gather the data, let's figure out what we can do today to prevent that next incident or the next accident. So it's all about let's leverage the data, let's leverage AI, let's leverage all the tools that we have today and make it more predictive and proactive. Key takeaways, so what I want to cover today, that we have the long-term goal, right? So you heard yesterday, today, we're going to work diligently as a community, all of us included, right? This is not just the safety committee, all of us to have that long-term goal. And I truly believe, working in the finance and insurance industry, that I strongly believe that if we can show the data and we can prove the data that what we're doing is making a safer pilot, the insurance and the underwriters will listen to us. I have an entire underwriting department reporting up through me, and I know how they think and what they look at it. So there is hope, and we can make an impact. And they're willing, as Dirk mentioned, to be engaged, right? So this is just not, we're just going to throw things at them, but let's engage those underwriters, those companies. There's about, I believe, about 13 companies that underwrite most of our PA46 fleet, and we can engage them in the process. Things you can do today to improve your flying cleans, maintain proficiency. So that's what I want to focus on, and you'll see the tools that, as a CFI, I leveraged and experiment, and it's really working. The number 3, that let's commit to each other to fly more often and train often, right? It's that simple. Like, this is a great convention, but when we go home tomorrow, let's commit to fly more and be safer. Okay, a couple quick disclaimers, and then we'll get to the main of the presentation. So I'm going to reference a couple tools you probably heard. Use these: ForeFlight, Stratus, Sentry, Cloud-Ahoy, AirSync, and Level. I have no association with them. These are just tools that I use. Garmin prohibits third-party Wi-Fi cards install. So if you have our Garmin friends here, there's your disclaimer. AirSync, so you also saw the AirSync boot. AirSync, not a permanent install. Note, always consult your trusted ANP. I'm not going to tell you here to go back and install any of these devices. It's consult with your trusted ANP. These are the technologies we're going to cover, and I'm going to show you how we're leveraging these tools today to train. So the Cloud-Ahoy, the personalized balance scorecard, this is where this gets really interesting, that I've been using the Cloud-Ahoy, it's called the CFI, or the debriefing for pilots, for a couple of years. And this last year or so, we figured out the way how to get rich data out of our airplane and automatically push it up. And the key is here that automatically and effortlessly, that I don't want, when I shut down the airplane, I don't want to spend 10 minutes, unplugging and looking at cards and downloading. I want to be able to, I shut down the plane, push it into the hangar, and when I go home and open up Cloud-Ahoy, the information is already there for me. So there's two tools in Cloud-Ahoy, and before I get into it, I'm just going to make a quick call out. We have a guest, Chris Huffman is sitting right in front of me. Last week, I was on a call with Kate, who's the COO at Cloud-Ahoy, and Chris was on the phone as the chief engineer behind Cloud-Ahoy. And as we're talking, I'm like, well, next week I'm going to be in Tucson. And Chris said, well, I live in Tucson. So I'm like, well, why don't you come out and join me for the presentation? So don't ask me any questions. All of the questions I'll defer to him. Just kidding. But we have a good source of data. So during the break or lunch, we can, obviously, Chris, pick your brain a little bit. So quickly touch on the Cloud-Ahoy debrief, data-driven post-flight debrief, import data from apps and devices, the approach segments annotated for quick find. One of the things I love about this is that when I look at Cloud-Ahoy, I don't have to figure out, like, this is initial approach fix, final approach fix. It automatically gathers all that. So if I do an instrument approach, I don't even have to tell that this was an instrument approach. I pull up the tool and it says, Ferenc, you just did ILS 36 into Ankeny. I'm like, that's pretty cool. You can also share your flight. So I had pilots I've flown, and I wasn't even flying with them, but the person said, hey, I'm going to share this flight with you. Take a look at it and let me know what you think. And you can replay second by second, and then via quick phone call, I was like, okay, I think maybe you were a little bit fast on final approach, or maybe so you can very easily debrief with your instructor or friend. let me talk a little bit about the cloud hoist. So now there is what the P stands for, right? So this is pilot. So this is for you that it's modeled after the airliner. So that's really, really cool. And it gathers not your data, but gathers the fleet of data and puts it into a group. So just like Dirk demonstrated, now we can analyze that group of data. It's all anonymous, so there's no tail number. Nobody knows that Ferenc had a bad landing, good landing. It's just raw data of the landings, collects it, analyzes, and then it demonstrates and shows where the improvement opportunities are. What also I like about this tool, that you can change your criteria. So if we say that we want final approach fee 85 to 90, and as we start looking at data, you can real-time adjust the criteria for your data. And as you adjust it, you can immediately visualize your data. So there's no programming, no nothing you can do. It's just you visualize the data as soon as you change your criteria. Safety events are automatically detected. So you don't have to say, well, I had a fast landing, short landing. If it's outside of the criteria, you get a notification that this is something you may want to debrief or look at it. Deliver immediate reports and alerts. So that's super cool that you can immediately see it. Phase one, as I talked to Kate and Chris, that phase one is primary focus for the safety committees, for the groups. And then there's a phase two that will be made, I guess, available or developed for individuals at pilots. And then we can look at our own data compared to the average fleet. So that's going to be so powerful that I will be able to compare how I personally fly, and that's only available for me in my own account compared to the fleet. So this is the dashboard. This is not an eye exam, so don't worry about trying to read the chart, but it gives you an immediate dashboard. After every landing, the data goes automatically in, and you can see the defined criteria. It's very similar to what Dirk showed, all of those criteria, and you see standard deviation, you see any alerts, you see, and from here you can drill down as, again, a primary focus right now, it's the safety committee. Let's go into some individual. So now I'm gonna switch to the debrief. This is the CFI tool debrief. This is something you can log in during your lunch or create an account. It's really, really super easy to set up. And this one is a first instrument approach that I captured. If you look at the top left corner, it's a thumbs down, right? So you can indicate that we have a overall score of 68. We're looking at somewhere in that 85 to 100 to be a nice stabilized approach. I'm not going to get into the details, but you see that the information it gathers, and depends on the avionics and the data you capture, it can be a lot richer data. And you see that once you put in your information about your plane, it automatically gives you the goals. So it looks up, I assume it's an FAA database, and say this is a PA-46 piston. But you can adjust those criteria, right? If you like to fly a little bit faster or slower, you can adjust those. But by default, it gives you, I assume it's all POH reference. And you can see, crossing altitudes maintained, IES 1,000 to 500. So you can do the ILS glide slope localizer. Is IAS consistent? What is your sync rate? Consistent at IEP descent. So you see the richness of data we get. I'm going to show you the next slide. It's a little bit better approach. And what you see that the data, we have more data points here, right? So what's interesting here that the previous screen we captured from an avionics that had an IFD 550, and this was from a G1000. So you can see that it captures more information. And you see that the overall score here was right getting into that range that it's 85 to 100. One comment I'll make that this is not a game to try to score 100. This is simply just a tool that we can leverage. I'm going to do, so this was instrument approaches. The next two is a traffic pattern. I can tell you just a quick caveat. I purposely did this, so as I was flying a traffic pattern, this is not how I fly the traffic pattern, but I was intentionally doing things to say that will the data be collected and how does it show up in CloudHoist. So You'll see here we got a score of 62, and then you look at my indicated airspeed. I was coming in way too fast. Indicated airspeed consistent. No, I wasn't really consistent. You look at the descent angle. So I did this, and I just pushed really forward, really hard, and pulled back. So you see the information it captures, right? And on this landing, I think, was I off center line? No, the center line was actually pretty good. So you see that whether it's a traffic pattern or approach, and I didn't do anything. I didn't tell the tool that this is an approach or traffic pattern. It just automatically picks up what you're flying. So here's a better landing, hopefully. So you look at that. In this landing, I was able to score a 91. And again, if you look at the richness of data, so again, this is coming from the G1000. And it's fascinating how much data is there, and it just automatically shows up. So you look at touchdown off center, this was 2 feet, that was pretty much spot on. Normal G at touchdown, right? So we had a normal G. Side loading at touchdown, like when some of this data I looked at, I'm like, how do we even capture this data? And it just all comes out of your, if you fly a G1000, it's all captured in that system. Okay, so let's go to, how do we get this data, right? I fly an older Malibu. I don't have G1000. How do I get this data? And here on this table, I'm going to walk you through that different ways to get the data, and you don't need to spend $500,000 to get this data. You can spend maybe $1,000, $500, and you will start collecting data. So the first one I want to point out, this AirSync, and Jason from AirSync is here, and there is a booth. The data that I showed you, we did put in an AirSync in my airplane and an AirSync in a G1000, and it's automatically collecting the data. I don't even have to think about it. The second I shut down the airplane, by the time I put it in the hangar, the data is uploaded into Cloud. So that's the richest data you can get if you have a G1000 or IFD. There's other avionics, probably the TXI 500 captures that, but that's the richest data you can get out of your MFDs. And if you have an AirSync, then it's all automatic. You don't have to worry about downloading and uploading the data. For steam gauges, you have this little level, the bomb device that I know AirSync is working on, that if you just have a standard 6-pack, how do we gather the same richness of data? And I know that they're working on, I talked to them at Oshkosh, and both to AirSync and to Level, and they're working on figuring out that, how can we get a solution for steam gauges? A fairly simple solution that gets you really, really great data is the Stratus and the Sentry. So these tools, as you know, most of us have this in our flight bag, and they collect, it has an AHRS and it has a WAS GPS built in. So you get very, very rich data all the way to the ground. What you don't get is an indicated airspeed, but it does calculate. So Cloud, just like Dirk mentioned, it does capture a calculated airspeed. And when I compared, I flew with Stratus and then also with the AirSync box and downloading the data, and it does a pretty good job, maybe 2-3 knots off of that calculated airspeed versus the actual indicated airspeed. And ultimately, right, you capture data in your ForeFlight Garmin, and if you don't have any of these devices, you can just turn on your ForeFlight Garmin. You can upload that data to Cloud. Now, that's probably the easiest way, but you're not going to have the AHRS data. You're not going to have that specific data that you can get from Sentry or Stratus, or better yet, if you have an MFD. So the higher you're here, right quadrant, you get the richest data here. You can still get very basic data. My recommendation is that if you don't want to invest here or you don't want to put anything in your airplane, you can still use Stratus and Sentry, and we will get really good data from here. Okay, so I'm looking at the time. We're doing pretty good. So let's go to the next slide. So key takeaways, the so what. So I thought quite a bit about, so what can we do? So as we walk away from the convention, we fly home tomorrow morning, we get back to our busy life, and then we'll forget about this. So what can we do today? As an instructor, I always say that there's no better way than get out to the airport, get into the airplane, and fly. And I know every time I climb into the airplane, I'm going to start thinking, I'm like, okay, how much fuel am I going to burn, and how much is it costing? Well, it doesn't matter because we're flying, $500,000, $1 million airplane. So that's the best way to commit and go out and fly often, right? Grab a safety pilot, grab your instructor, go out, do landings, do some approaches. I've heard with so many pilots I fly with that I'm an autopilot pilot. I'm like, okay, that's great. So on average, we fly 2 minutes on a trip. That's great, but what if your autopilot gives up or you actually need to hand fly the airplane, right? So we do need to know how to fly instrument approaches, hand fly it, whether it's by flight director or just by the green arrows, and go out and let's practice it. Doing 3 approaches a month as a training takes you, probably less than an hour. 10 landings if you fly 2-3 times, 3 landings. You fly twice a month, go out and do 5 landings. So, and it really makes a big difference. If you commit to this, I know the safety committee demonstrated that if we fly more than 100 hours a year, then our proficiency significantly increases. So, that's the one takeaway, that let's really leverage and commit to training. The other one, the operating practices. So the safety committee really wrote those up, and they actually work, right? When I printed it out, when I learned about it, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to go up and just follow those operating practices, and they do work. So if you don't have it, you can download it to your iPad or print it out, and next time you fly, practice those operating procedures or operating practices. The last comment I made, that this is not a video game, right? So if you set up Cloud Ahoy, this is not about I want to get a 100 score. It's how do I leverage this information so I can improve my landings, I can improve having a stabilized approach. And it does score. I only showed the approach and the landings, but it scores everything. If you go out and you do steep turns, you land, and you're going to have a score for your steep turns. If you're going to do slow flight, if you're going to do stalls, it automatically recognizes the maneuvers that you're doing, and it will give you an overall score. Thank you. So we still have about 20 minutes, so we can open it up for some questions. I know Chris is here in front, and Dirk and Kim. So it's this last 3 presentation, it was all about how we gather the data, how we leverage the data to improve our flying skills. We have a question. Ryan's got the mic.
Yes, I got the mic right here.
Yeah, thanks. This is great for individual data gathering. That's awesome. What's the implementation plan to gather all this data and work on it on a fleet-wide basis?
Really good question. So I brought back the slide, if you can put it up on the big screen. Really good question. So this Cloud Ahoy debrief, it's truly for individuals, and it looks at your individual, right, whether it's a landing and approach. See the Cloud Ahoy FOQA, this is actually in beta version, and this is for the fleet. So my understanding, and Chris helped me out here, that if we set up an MMOPA group, and Ferenc, I sign up for that group. I said I want to share my data. It's shared anonymously, but every time I land or do an approach, my data is being uploaded to the MOPA group. And then the safety committee, or whoever we decide, they can access that, and they can start seeing the data and collect the data.
Yeah, but what's the rollout plan for how to, that's kind of been, you must subscribe to this and you must send your data, which is, we'll get some adoption.
Yep.
The other data, the real data is from the ADSB, like the TBM guys did it. What's the implementation plan for that?
So I would say that this tool is just an example. There are other tools out there. The idea is how do we get the data automatically and effortlessly. I don't know if we have a rollout plan yet, but that's why Kim and the safety committee we're going to work through it and make sure that we get that. And I would argue personally that this data where you're getting real data from your box is probably a lot more accurate and better than just looking at the ADS-B data.
Yeah, I'd love to see the plan for how many subscribers or how many airplanes we expect to have data for and when. Like in 6 months, we expect to have the 100% of the fleet. Or
Yep.
what's that plan?
So we don't, I mean, Kim, unless you know Ryan, we don't, we're working on it.
Yeah, so where this really, obviously Kim coming onto the safety committee, that's been a wonderful thing, and her bringing some of those Part 121 experiences and really stressing on trying to gather this data so we can really have some foundation to work from. John Gramai and I were actually up at Oshkosh together, and we did walk around and look at some of the various options in Cloud Ahoy. We got I don't want to steal, and if I speak out of turn, please correct me, but I believe Charlie Precourt with CJP was working with Cloud Ahoy to roll out this FOQA at that point in time. It is still in the beta stage. I can tell you, John Gramai and I went ahead and did purchase an AirSync and Cloud Ahoy subscription, and we have started collecting that data. I can tell you I've got like 10 flights in with it. It is very feature-rich. It's the same data that you could get if you went and downloaded it out of your G1000. That's really all it's doing is syncing that data and importing it. There is some nuances here or there with the product. There are other competing products out there. We do have a relationship with our scholarship winners as well with the University of North Dakota, and the University of North Dakota has an entire research team that has even offered to work with us as well for doing some of this data reduction and data analysis. So right now we're at step 0, but we want to present to everyone, these are the things that are out there, and hopefully by next year we'll have some mild adoption, and there may be other plans to roll this out broadly and within the organization. We do things currently to try to promote some certain things, and maybe the organization itself could look to try to help promote this in turn for getting the data back for everyone. So we're at step 0, but that is something that we are looking at, and we don't have by December we will have 10% of the fleet equipped with this. It's not, parts of this is not a trivial expense. I went to John and I went to the far extreme with the AirSync box and such, and it's not terribly expensive, but it's not terrible. It's not, it's not $29.95 either.
And Ryan, I would add that as Kate and I were chatting, so Kate is the CEO at Cloud Ahoy, I did ask her, I said that, if we have interest, would they consider MMOPA to be a beta testers or experiment? And they're very willing, so we have a follow-up after the convention. And again, this is just one of the tools, so please don't take it that this is it. It's one of the tools that we experimented, and I think there's, the idea of let's figure out how we collect data. That's the idea, right? Like, without data, we cannot improve, and 2, we cannot engage the underwriters. If we have data, if we can prove them what we're doing is working and we are safer pilots, then they will listen to us.
So I see a number of hands raised. I'm going to try to go in the order I've seen them. So question here, question over on that side of the room, then over to Dave, and then to John, and then to John. So here you go, sir.
Okay, thanks. I hate to beat on the insurance question because at the end of the day, the most important thing is personal and fleet safety. But having said that, do you anticipate having an impact as we talk to insurers on aggregated and anonymized data from the fleet? Or is this potentially an individualized sort of thing that puts us in risk categories individually?
So I can share my opinion. I do think that we can make an impact, and generally the insurance companies or underwriters, they would engage and interested, and the more data we have, the more interested they will get, because that's how actuaries and underwriters work. Ultimately, the goal would be to demonstrate that MMOPA members are safer pilots than non-MMOPA members. If you're a master aviator or you're going through the programs that the safety committee designed, you are a safer pilot. And start changing how underwriters look at from a rating table. And again, I'm not an expert in that space, but some of those rating tables, I don't know in the aviation industry how often it gets revised, but today when John and I had this discussion, right? Like John is turning 70 years old and probably in better health than me. So why would just because you're turning an age would be thrown into a table D or F versus when you were preferred? 40 years of flying, no accidents. So yes, the long-term goal, it's not going to happen overnight, but the long-term goal is that let's figure out how we get the data. Let's figure out how we make our fleet and our community a safer pilot. Statistically show that, right? So it's not just Ferenc says I'm a safe pilot, but statistically show that what we're doing makes us safer. And then at the same time, work with the insurance company so we can have an impact. And I think if we do that, right, so that's going to create a pool of safe pilots, and we should get a better premium. Then you're going to have a pool of pilots that they're unsafe, so the insurance companies, they're not going to take on that risk, or they're going to increase the prices even further, right? So there's going to be a motivation for even those pilots who don't participate. There's going to be a fairly big motivation, again, aspirational goal to say, become a member, participate in these programs, because you get better rates, and so what's in it for me?
Okay, just one thing I wanted to bring up. The quality of the data is important, okay? The better the collection device, the more benefit we're going to get. But for those of us who are technology challenged and are not going to go out and write a check and buy this, that, and the other thing, this right here is all you need to see if you want to get into the app. All right? I've recorded every flight I've taken. It's been a long time. And I get pretty darn good data just off of the app and just on the phone. So if you want to go in and download the app and see what kind of data it produces and so on, you want the CFI version because that's where you get the real scoring. But it really is simple to use. There's going to be a little thing in the magazine coming up. But you don't have to go out and work. We're not going to pull the data chip out of the G1000 after every flight. We know that. Okay, but to see what you can do with this thing, it's not a big investment. We all have the ability to do it right here.
And I'm not going to, I'm like parents here, I don't speak for Cloud Ahoy, but I do know when John Gramai and I were walking around at Oshkosh talking to individuals, Cloud Ahoy, and correct me if I'm going to misspeak again, they were offering a 30 or 35 day, they don't even ask for your credit card up front. So if you don't like it, they're not going to charge you anything. You can just let it roll off, ignore the emails, and they won't take anything from you. So it's really a free-to-try type thing.
So I've got two questions. One, I've got 5 years of history already downloaded of an M500 and almost 1 year of history, and I do download, not every flight, but I download all the flights every second or third flight, and I look at a lot of them. So I've got this 7 years of history on my computer today. Will the tools like Cloud Ahoy allow you to import that, or do you only start when you plug in cards and it picks up other data? And the second question, in the G3000, there are actually two levels of data. One of them is in the upper right SD card, which you can pull out and copy to a computer and do a lot of stuff with. The second one is in what's called the CMC area, which you can get to through the maintenance password. And it has multiple databases for every flight, including 5 Hertz data, which picks up things like wheel rotation and a lot of settings and things like this. Do any of the tools you know of or use the CMC data, which is far better than the top card data? So those are the two questions.
Good question, John. So Mike, if I can ask the Mike, and Chris is probably a much better, the data engineer in Cloud, a much better person to answer those questions than me. But the short answer that there is import capabilities. But Chris, if you could answer those questions.
For the first question, yes, you can import historical data. If it's rich data, that's the best, from a G1000 or something. If the data you've stored just has GPS locations, we have trouble reconstructing the wind from 7 years ago. So if the data is better if it's complete, but you can do historical data, and just the quality would be dependent on how much quality is in the data. And as far as that other bus, I haven't heard of anyone using that. I've heard of different buses that have different amount of information that we've been working on getting, but I haven't heard of that specifically. The other thing inside behind maintenance mode for the SD card also, I'm not aware of that.
Thank you, Chris.
I'm live, okay. Okay, as Ryan mentioned, we came across these products back at Oshkosh, and I've used it since I went back to Houston. And as Ferenc mentioned, and as Dirk mentioned as well, there are things that you do that you don't consciously recognize that you're doing when you're in the various phases of flight. And this has been a fantastic tool to identify those things. That, okay, well, I'm not doing this right because I keep getting this score, and I need to focus on this. And it focuses. It helps you focus on your proficiency and what your tendencies are, because you don't realize you're doing things. So I think it's a fantastic product. Dave mentioned about the being technology challenged. I don't consider myself to be a technology expert, but with the AirSync, I don't do anything. The white card sits up in the G3000. It sits up in the top slot. It sends information to the box, and the box through the wireless system sends it to its Cloud Ahoy, and then it's sitting on my computer when I get home. So it is an effortless activity. So anybody can do it if you want to do it. But I think the long and short of all of this is that this is not going to be a top-down process where the safety committee is going to go find information and provide reports. It's incumbent on all of us. If we want to go from where we are today, where we have the status quo of insurance, to somewhere else where we have a better opportunity to get better rates, we all have to participate in this process. Or we have to get enough of us participating to where it makes the data, there is critical mass of data where it's worthwhile to present to the market. And so in the end, it's up to us to make this happen. It's not up to the safety committee to make this happen. We have to be willing to participate. We have to be willing to share data.
A great comment, and goes back to what Kim said, that we all have to be committed to do this, right? And if we're not, the safety committee, a group of 4 or 5 individuals will not make a big difference. Will make a difference, but not a big one. So, other questions? I'm pretty sure lunch is ready outside. So.
All right. Well, with that, parents, thank you so much. I appreciate the presentation. We'll be having lunch outside. We'll, I think, reconvene here at 1 o'clock.